Yep, that was cool. Because I didn't, we haven't seen Jordy in a while, so that was very nice. Because I didn't know about this game before, so we've just been we're delayed in coming on today, ladies and gentlemen, because we had our friend Jordy from Madrid, Spain, on with us, and he was introducing us to his daughters, who are all angels of various kinds, and they're all professional women now, and they're going to play a game today called the Transformation Game. And Jordan and I have not heard of it. I'm assuming that our other participants, Shauna and Nancy, have not heard of it also. And so we're going to explore that game. It's called the Transformation Game. And
in that box, the style of that box looked too familiar, as if it's from a series. Like they might have more than just the Transformation Game. I wonder if it's a group of board games, or if they just have cool packaging that looks like some other packaging I've seen.
Oh, I don't know. I'm really not sure, but anyway, it looks like an interesting game, and so we will begin. So, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I'm sorry we're a little late this morning, but we took a moment off to chat with our friends in Spain, in Madrid, and they were telling us about a game called the Transformation Game, which we're going to look into. It sounds very interesting to see what it is. It might even be a game that we'll play at Confluence. It sounds like it has potential.
Well, it kind of reminds me of, we were late to Synchronicity because of a synchronicity. And I remember it was like calling into the office years and years back. And I said, well, I can't come in today. And they said, well, why not? I said, I have a vision problem. And they said, well, what's that? I said, I can't see coming in. So
oh, very good.
So we were late for Synchronicity because of the synchronicity. So
right, absolutely. So Jordan is going to hold up the book because mine is going to arrive tomorrow.
Okay.
and so I have the big volume. So the book we're working with is Synchronicity by C.G. Jung. It also, so that's the book in a separate standalone paperback. And I found that I could buy it on Amazon yesterday for just $10. So I bought it. I hadn't had time to get to it up until now. And so I bought it yesterday. It's going to arrive tomorrow, so I will have my copy. But in the meantime, it's also in this handy dandy volume 8 of the collected works of C.G. Jung, The Structure and Dynamics of the Psyche, volume 8. And you can find that. I sent out a notice for this session earlier, and it is, let's see, it's in our Dropbox. Go down to the bottom in the collected works Dropbox, and you'll find the collected works of C.G. Jung volumes 1 through 20. And in there, you can find an electronic version of that. And I'm about to give you the link for that now. Just a moment. And I put it in the notice, but I'm going to put it one more time here. And so I'm going to put it on the YouTube chat. So there it is. And I'll also put it on the Zoom chat for those of you that are on Zoom. The entire collected works in electronic form are at this link and under collected works. So I urge you to go take a look at that and to download whatever electronic versions you want. This happens to be volume 8. So you want to look for volume 8 of the collected works of C.G. Jung, and the book called Synchronicity, which Jordan has the freestanding version of it, begins at paragraph 816, paragraph 816 of the big volume. So in case you want to take a look at that and read through it, it's quite available to you, and we can continue on. So go ahead, Jordan.
I was going to say, and since you don't have the standalone, the pulled out chapbook, maybe we start out. I can read the foreword and the editorial preface, which is only 4 pages.
Well, I'll read the foreword, because the foreword is paragraph 816, correct?
Well, no, there's the foreword is paragraph 816, but then that's here. But then prior to that, Sonu Shamdasani has written. There's a foreword to the 2010 edition for this, and then also an editorial preface. So basically, it's him setting this up, and then the book starts paragraph 816 with Jung's foreword.
Okay. I was thinking of doing that next week, but go ahead. Why don't you just read the foreword to the 2010 edition? And
yeah, the editorial preface is more probably more attributions and such. So
so how long is that forward?
It's just 3 pages.
Okay, go for it. Go for it.
Yeah. Forward to the 2010 edition of Synchronicity, an Acausal connecting principle, titled Reading Jung After the Red Book. With the publication of Liber Novus, Jung's Red Book, a new chapter opens in the reading of Jung's works. For the first time, one is in a position to grasp the constitution of Jung's work from 1914 onward, and to trace the intimate connections between his self-experimentation and his attempts to determine the typical features of this process through his work and his patients, and translate his insights into a language acceptable to a medical and scientific public. Thus, reading Liber Novus brings it with it the task of rereading Jung's collected works, much of which appears in a wholly new light. In the winter of 1913.
Let's just stop for a moment. Sonu Shamdasani likes to refer to the Red Book as Liber Novus. I usually try to refer to it as the Red Book because that's how it's commonly known. And so whenever Jordan is reading the words Liber Novus, right?
Yeah, L-I-B-E-R. Liber.
L-I-B-E-R. Okay, Liber Novus. He is reading Shamdasani's what Shamdasani has there. I have a kvetch about that, which I've talked about elsewhere. So, anyway, so I call it the Red Book. But anyway, just so we're not confused. Okay,
that's a good clarification, because if I switch to French, Liber is going to be Livre, L-I-B-R, like book, new.
Well, let me just explain my kvetch. Okay.
Yep.
My kvetch is that Jung bought basically a blank journal scrapbook, a very complicated one that had hundreds of pages in it. And that was his original Red Book. I believe that book had embossed on the spine of it Liber Novus, okay, right. And which simply means new book. Right. I don't believe that Dr. Jung had anything to put anything to do with putting those words on the spine of that book. And I have proof of that from photographs. And so, it's like if you go to the Hallmark store and you buy a journal, and it'll say, my journal or something on the spine of it.
Or moleskin, I mean, it's
yeah.
it's like just a
right. It's something that the publisher of the notebook has put on in advance. And so it's not Dr. Jung very pridefully saying, like, this is the New Testament. It isn't that. It's not the new book in that sense. And for that reason, I call it the Red Book, and it's commonly called the Red Book. But Sonasham Dasani, he's the expert, and he seems to think that Liber Novus is significant. So,
well, and I think I'm going to jump ship to your side there, just like we're changing pronouns of he, him to them, and he's an historian, so he's not going to change a fact regardless of if it's just relationship by juxtaposition. So if it's present, he's going to outline it in context. And so I think what it might be pertinent for me to do here, reading this piece as it appears, I'll just say the Red Book and just leave.
That'll be good. So we're not confusing people.
Because also people will be writing a book back then longhand, penmanship with a pen, fountain pen or dip pen. And so that on the shelf would just mean new book, like I'm drafting a new book. So
okay. So Jordan is going to be reading. Justin is asking for Jordan's email address. Do you object to me putting your email address on the YouTube chat, Jordan?
No, it's fine. I'll get some more spam, but I get so much spam anyway.
Yeah, so I'll go ahead and put it out there while you're reading. So go ahead.
Cool. In the winter of 1913, Jung embarked on a process of self-experimentation. He deliberately gave free rein to his fantasy thinking and carefully noted what ensued. He later called this process active imagination. He wrote down these fantasies in the Black Books. These are not personal diaries, but rather the records of a self-experimentation. The dialogues that form these active imaginations can be regarded as a type of thinking in a dramatic form. When World War I broke out, Jung considered that a number of his fantasies were precognitions of this event. This led him to compose the first draft of the Red Book, which consisted of a transcription of the main fantasies from the Black Books, together with a layer of interpretive commentaries and lyrical elaboration. Here, Jung attempted to derive general psychological principles from the fantasies, as well as to understand to what extent the events portrayed in the fantasies presented in a symbolic form developments that were to occur in the world, i.e. precognizance and collective unconscious. Jung recopied the manuscript in an ornate Gothic script into a large red leather folio volume, which he illustrated with his own paintings. The overall theme of this book is how Jung regains his soul and overcomes the contemporary malaise of spiritual alienation. This is ultimately achieved by enabling the rebirth of a new image of God in his soul and developing a new worldview in the form of a psychological and theological cosmology. Between 1916 and 1928, Jung published a number of works in which he attempted to translate some of the themes of the Red Book into contemporary psychological language. In 1928, the sinologist Richard Wilhelm sent him a copy of the Taoist alchemical treatise, The Secret of the Golden Flower, inviting him to write a commentary. Struck by the parallelism between the imagery of the text and some of his own mandalas, Jung finally decided to set aside his work on the Red Book and not publish it. Instead, he devoted himself to the cross-cultural study of the individuation process, focusing on medieval alchemy in particular, using parallels with his own material as a means to present the process in an indirect and allegorical form. Until now, this has presented formidable challenges for readers outside of Jung's inner circle. They have an excerpt here. Synchronicity. I saw a terrible flood. And this is one of Jung's visions. I saw a terrible flood that covered all the northern and low-lying lands between the North Sea and the Alps. It reached from England up to Russia and from the coast of the North Sea right up to the Alps. I saw yellow waves, swimming rubble, the death of countless thousands. 2 weeks passed, then the vision returned, still more violent than before. And an inner voice spoke, in quotes, look at it, it is completely real, and it will come to pass. You cannot doubt this. And that's from Schaffhausen, October 1913. He continues, on July 31st, immediately after my lecture, I learned from the newspapers that war had broken out. Finally, I understood. And when I disembarked in Holland on the next day, nobody was happier than I. Now I was sure that no schizophrenia was threatening me. I understood that my dreams and my visions came to me from the subsoil of the collective unconscious. Written in Aberdeen, July 1914. Finishing up this preamble piece, the realization that a number of his fantasies and dreams did not pertain to his personal psychology, but were connected with collective events that were about to take place in the world, led Jung to write the first manuscript of the Red Book. He attempted to ascertain to what extent the material and the rest of his fantasies was also bound up with what was to happen in the world, and what this interdependence of the individual and the collective meant. Likewise, Jung's work on the Red Book ended with the fateful arrival of the text of The Secret of the Golden Flower from Richard Wilhelm. For Jung, the pressing question was, how are such meaningful events, not linked by any apparent causal chains, possible? What does this say about the physical universe? In his memorial for Wilhelm, Jung used the word synchronicity to characterize the significance of the simultaneity of events that could not be causally linked. Jung gave such examples as the I Ching, the coincidence of Chinese and European periods of style, and astrology. Only with the collaboration of the Nobel Prize-winning physicist Wolfgang Pauli did Jung feel able to attempt such a far-reaching reformulation of the conception of the physical universe and its interdependence with the psyche in a volume entitled The Interpretation of Nature and the Psyche, in parentheses, which included a paper by Pauli on the influence of archetypal ideas on the scientific theories of Kepler. Jung's work on synchronicity articulates a psychophysical ontology that could accommodate the experiences that underlie the Red Book. Pauli and Jung self-consciously considered their work a new form of pre-Cartesian natural philosophy, implicitly reinstating the antique conception of the correspondence between the physical and the spiritual worlds, and hence bridging ancient and modern worldviews. And that's the close of that initial forward to the 2010 edition.
Okay, and it seems to me what is significant here, and this is typical of Jung's writing throughout, is that Jung was a pioneer. He was out there in the Great Plains with, like Lewis and Clark or and Sacagawea, and he was finding things that no one else had really tried to pull together and understand about the human psyche. And others had parts of it. William Blake, of course, had his plates on Answer to Job, or on the Book of Job, for example, which closely parallel what Jung was finding and wrote in his book Answer to Job. So various people. Pardon?
I would add to your William Blake example, the bigger picture one from Blake would be his book, The Marriage of Heaven and Hell, because that's directly the syzygy and the both and the enantiodromia and the opposites.
Right. So William Blake in The Marriage of Heaven and Hell, and then in his Book of Job, in the early part of the 19th century, he died in 1825, but in the early part of the 19th century and the late part of the ancient 18th century, William Blake started to explore these ideas in his etchings, and it's quite remarkable because he did his etchings backward, which was what is required in an etching. And so there have been people over the ages who've had bits and pieces, but it was really Jung who started to try to systematize or bring all these things together in a common place. And the more he did it, the more it opened out to him. And so at the end of his life, he was saying, I still don't have a final answer about what I'm doing. I don't have a final answer. I'm just, please don't assume that I've come to the end of it. And that's where our role comes in for all people who are interested in Jungian psychology to keep working toward the answer. But what Jung did was he specified the field in which we're all working. Go ahead, Jordan. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, I apologize for interrupting. Just to add to he was writing backwards, which is a printmaker's tool. And it's like, it demystifies Da Vinci's writing backwards, because what happens is if you're ever going to wet something and flip it to make a print of it, which you could do with various chemicals even then, what happens is if you write backwards all the time, then you're a wonderful etching editor, because then you can proofread it backwards instead of going, oh crap, once it's all done. So in the actual implementation of the first piece that they flip, to make a print, if you have trained yourself to learn how to read backwards
and write backwards, which is what Da Vinci did,
right, and also sometimes upside down just to push it, then what it does is at first your brain goes all kinds of wrong ways except the wrong way backwards.
Right.
And it trains your body, actually your editing skills and your visual skills, to see things that are out of place even when they're not familiar. And it's interesting because I find that to be an exercise of how to see the unseen, is training penmanship backwards. Was I used to teach people to write backwards and upside down. At that point, I thought, it was just a cool creative tool, until I realized with Blake and his etchings that, that's so you don't waste because paper was expensive. I mean, the final paper it would go on, and that inking process, was not cheap. So you couldn't really afford to make too many mistakes in the final product. So
and what has been shown in recent years now is that the brain can adjust very quickly. I'll give you an example. They did an experiment over at the Naval Academy where they made midshipmen wear visors, and the visors reversed everything and put them upside down so that they were seeing the world back, they were in mirror image and upside down, so that the sky was down and the ground was up. And then they had them start walking around the campus and to see what would happen. And within 4 or 5 hours, these people were seeing the world right side up, even though they were looking through these special goggles. And so the brain adjusts very quickly in that experiment.
And to go right along with that, they did a study at Harvard where if you jumble all the letters in a word except for the first and the last one, you can, in some of them, change them to numbers, like E could be 3 even, which is backwards in the middle of all these jumbled letters. After you get the cadence and the rhythm, you'll read it just as fast as if you were reading it and it was spelled in the right order.
Correct. Yeah. Right. And there are lots of examples of that now in puzzles and that sort of thing.
Right.
But but the significance of what we're talking about here is that Jung, as he developed his writing and what he was writing about, he kept developing his ideas. And so you can see them develop right through if you read the entire collected works, and you can see them develop. And now with the Red Book, and especially since the Red Book's been published, we can see, what the raw material was that he came up with. And actually, you need the black books, okay, because the Red Book he actually edited. And so as I'm now reading the black books, which were his original notebooks in German, you find a lot of things that he edited out even in the Red Book. And so it's really a fascinating study. And I think a lot of people are intimidated by the black books, or even the Red Book for that matter, because it's 7 volumes, but it's really not, it's not that much reading actually. So here's an example, the black book, and this is volume 3, I think. Yeah, volume 3.
Oh, you froze up there. Your video is frozen. And the audio.
And so that's only 150 to 200 pages in each book. And so it's quite doable if you don't get too intimidated by the volume of the 7 black books. And what I have been finding as I've been reading them is, holy smokes, there's some really important ideas here that were left out of the Red Book, and now we have to know about. And so the significance here is that this book, Synchronicity, is after 40 years of writing. He had been seriously writing on his life's work, basically. He didn't really start writing on his life's work until he had his midlife crisis with Freud and with Sabine Spielrein. So you can see that part of his life in the movie A Dangerous Method. So that's before the Red Book period. Actually, it ends with his breakup with Freud. And up until that point, he was a very plain vanilla psychiatrist based on what everybody else thought. But when he broke off from Freud and Sabine Spielrein went out of his life, and Tony Wolff came into his life in addition to his wife, Emma, and he started to analyze what the significance of that menage a trois was for him. Then he began in earnest his Red Book period, which lasted 16 years, although the vision part of the Red Book actually lasted only about a year. But the Red Book, some of the Red Book was written within a 5-year period, and then the rest of the 16 years, he was actually writing out the Red Book in German calligraphy to emphasize its significance. And meanwhile, he was cogitating on it all, but he hadn't found an anchor. And it was, boom, this meeting with Secret of the Golden Flower from Wilhelm, that was a synchronicity, and which told him, there's something here and you better get going on your other writing. And so then he did a lot of other writing right through the 30s, and it was only in after his heart attack in his 40s, or in the 1940s, when he was nearly 70 years old, that he wrote his most significant 4 things, which were Answer to Job, Ion, and what's the other one? The Transformation of the Mass, and Mysterium Conjunctionis. Those 4 were really the most significant writings of his lifetime, although all of his writings, of course, going back to the beginning, were profound. But he said at the end of his life that he would rewrite all of them. He would rewrite all of them except Answer to Job. And so that meant that he still thought that there could be improvements and more scholarly footnoting and that sort of thing. And you see that in Symbols of Transformation, which is volume 5, I think. It's volume 4, volume 5, where
isn't Ion volume 5? It doesn't matter, but
Ion is volume 9.
9, yeah.
9-2, I think. 9-2, because volume 9 is split into 2 parts, with a small I for 1 and a small double I for 2. And the 9-1 is Archetypes of the Collective Unconscious. And so all these books are phenomenally important, but he also saw, by looking back at his own work, that there were things that he could improve upon if he went back and rewrote them. And the only one that I know of that he really went back and rewrote was Symbols of Transformation, which was originally published in English as what is it called? Just a minute. Hold on a second. Okay. It's called Psychology of the Unconscious in English. And it was translated by one of his first followers and into English in about 1916, I think. And it was that book that he completely revised 40 years later into Symbols of Transformation. But it's very, very interesting, by the way, to read Psychology of the Unconscious in its original form. And that is available on Audible. I got it on Audible, about a decade ago, and I probably have listened to it 5 or 6 times to really grok what it meant. But anyway, so the significance for synchronicity now, which we're going to get into, is that this is 40 years later, in the early 1950s, when he was pulling together some old papers and also giving some meaning to what he was saying. And he had been unsure of himself, even though he'd been working with Pauli, the Nobel Prize winning physicist, Wolfgang Pauli. he was still unsure of himself, and finally he pulled it together. So now I'm going to read the foreword that he actually wrote. Go ahead, Jordan.
Before you do, I just noticed in this editorial preface, not to read anywhere near the whole thing, not even the whole first paragraph, but there's a connection I've just made from this first paragraph that is part of, it comes from memories, dreams, reflections.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it bears witness to be important here.
Okay, go ahead.
Couple or so sentences. But when a young man, Jung saw a solid oak table suddenly split right across. Soon afterwards, a strong steel knife broke in pieces for no apparent reason. His superstitious mother, who also witnessed both these events, looked at him significantly, and this made Jung wonder what it was all about. And I never made this connection, but the solid oak table, I wrote this in the margin just now, the opened and unfinished tree as the tabletop differentiated, became the two sides, which turned back up vertically, became above and below in the living tree. And then, after that differentiation, the knife shattering as a form giver of differentiation that was preambling the initial split afterwards of the table becoming the two. So it's interesting to me, the table splits into like a cell divided, and then the cell continues to divide as the knife shattering of then the differentiating of the psyche, which then continues after birth. And so I think that I never made the connection of just the one became two and the two became many, of all within still the one before.
Right. And yeah. So anyway, this foreword that he wrote, which is the beginning of this book, and Jordan, you'll have to check to see if it's exactly the same editorially, but this foreword is actually his explanation of his unsureness up until this point, and so you'll see that. So we're on paragraph 816 of volume 8 of the collected works of C.G. Jung. This is the foreword to Synchronicity, to the essay called Synchronicity. In writing this paper, I have, so to speak, made good a promise which for many years I lacked the courage to fulfill. The difficulties of the problem and its presentation seemed to me too great the intellectual responsibility, without which such a subject cannot be tackled, too inadequate in the long run, my scientific training. If I have now conquered my hesitation and at last come to grips with my theme, it is chiefly because my experiences of the phenomenon of synchronicity have multiplied themselves over decades, while on the other hand, my researches into the history of symbols, and of the fish symbol in particular, brought the problem ever closer to me. And finally, because I have been alluding to the existence of this phenomenon on and off in my writings for 20 years without discussing it any further, I would like to put a temporary end to this unsatisfactory state of affairs by trying to give a consistent account of everything I have to say on this subject. I hope it will not be construed as presumption on my part if I make uncommon demands on the open-mindedness and goodwill of the reader. Not only is he expected to plunge into regions of human experience which are dark, dubious, and hedged about with prejudice, but the intellectual difficulties are such as the treatment and elucidation of so abstract a subject must inevitably entail. As anyone can see for himself after reading a few pages, there can be no question of complete description and explanation of these complicated phenomena, but only an attempt to broach the problem in such a way as to reveal some of its manifold aspects and connections, and to open up a very obscure field which is philosophically of the greatest importance. As a psychiatrist and psychotherapist, I have often come up against the phenomena in question and could convince myself how much these inner experiences meant to my patients. In most cases, they were things which people do not talk about for fear of exposing themselves to thoughtless ridicule. I was amazed to see how many people have had experiences of this kind and how carefully the secret was guarded. So my interest in this problem has a human as well as a scientific foundation. In the paragraph 817, in the performance of my work, I had the support of a number of my friends who are mentioned in the text. Here I would like to express my particular thanks to Dr. Liliane Freiron for her help with the astrological material. Now, before we go on, we did this a little earlier with for Jordy and his band of anima creatures, women, his daughters, but we need, because it's very difficult to catch a synchronicity as it's happening. And I've been fortunate to catch several now in my lifetime. One of them was extremely important to me. I'm going to show it to you now because I did catch it. And some of you have no doubt heard about this, but I want to repeat it again. So there was a day in September of 2016 when I was very down in the dumps, and I could think of nothing better to do than to go into the Cathedral of the Navy, which is the chapel of the U.S. Naval Academy, which I'm privileged to be able to get into over the years. And so I went in there. It was a weekday morning. There were exactly 0 lights on in the chapel, and I was completely alone. There was not another soul in the place. And I went to a favorite location that I like to sit in, which is in the right arm of the cathedral, looking up to the left side. And it looks up at a stained glass window that was done by Tiffany. And it's quite a remarkable window, as you'll see in a moment. But anyway, I like to look at that window and look at its great beauty as compared to other stained glass, which is also in the building. There happen to be 2 beautiful Tiffany's in that chapel. And so I sort of entered an attitude of prayer, trying to contemplate why I was so down and that sort of thing. And as I was sitting there, suddenly a light came upon me. And I looked up, and this is what I saw, as many of you probably know. So this is what I saw. So here's the stained glass window, and here's the light coming into this darkened chapel, and it's shining only on me, on nothing else in the room, but straight on me. And it changed my attitude completely in a second. It changed my attitude. And I said to myself, oh my God, nobody's ever going to believe this unless I take a picture of it. So I picked up my cell phone and I took a picture of it. And this is what you see, what happened. And as you can see, here's the Tiffany window. You can see how its quality is quite different from the quality of these stained glass windows, which are on the lower level. There's a balcony in here where normally the choir would be up here during a service, but the Tiffany window is quite different, and you can see the the qualitative difference between the Tiffany and the other windows. And the sun is shining only on me. And this is a traditional symbol that you see sometimes in movies about religious events, where there'll be a light that comes on whoever. And I said, I have to take a picture of this. And then I decided, well, in order to appreciate this, I have to take a selfie, turn the camera around on myself. And I took a selfie, and this is the picture of me. And you can see how happy I look all of a sudden. And 5 seconds before, 10 seconds before this, I was really in a funk. And you can see how dark it was in the chapel, because these two things to the left of me, or to my right, are actually stained glass windows. And it was a very dark day, and it was very dark in the chapel. And so the light was only on me on that specific pew in the chapel. Now, the thing that's significant about this is you could not plan this. It would be totally impossible to plan it, because there are pews that seat 2,000 people in that building, and you could not possibly know where the right place was to sit. And yes, of course, the sun does go across the sky around that time every day, but you'd have to be an astronomer, astrologer, to know where it was going to be at any given time. So you just could not have planned it at all. And yet, by synchronicity, the light and the darkness in the chapel and my funk all came together at that same moment. And boom, I got it. At that moment, I understood synchronicity completely. And since then, I've been aware of synchronous moments that occur to me almost every day. So go ahead, George.
Well, actually, I just you shown the picture several times. I just sent this over to my iPad so I can show. I made a connection between something I've shown often, but your picture of your emerging from the dark, the light in the dark. Let me download this real quick, and then if you could let me share screen.
Yeah.
I believe I didn't make this connection before, but just download so it's right in the front of my pictures. I don't have to go searching for it online.
So what I want to further say is that I captured a bunch of these, either on video or still camera. Those were the two that I captured on still. And you can see these synchronous moments that I have captured by looking at a video that I did that's on this YouTube channel called Finding the Living God. And
so if you would show your picture of your face in the light again, and then I'll pull this up just so they kind of 1-2.
Right. Okay, so here's my face in the light again. There you go.
Okay, and then I'll share my screen, and then can you see that?
Yeah.
And so that's a little complicated. But the whole around her, a whole of the context around her, these ghouls and goblins and shadow contents of the unconscious, that in a sense are all refining themselves to become her. And called The Coming of the Fairies from early 20th century. But it just reminded me of that light in the dark.
And coming to wholeness. It's the idea of
Yeah.
coming to wholeness, that we have these ghosts and goblins in our unconscious, and they want to be conscious. They want to push themselves forward, because keep in mind now, individuation is nothing more than an acorn which wants to become an oak, and that acorn has within it everything that oak tree needs. And that oak tree is a unique oak tree. In other words, although we can identify many trees as oak trees, you can never find two identical oak trees, and you can't find two identical human beings either. Even identical twins are different, and they flower in a different way. And so
that's an excellent example of how our lineage DNA then creates a different oak tree of each of us, and then the context in which the oak tree grows up in, base soil, acidic soil, nitrogen rich or deprived soil, wind, sun, rain, weather, all those are different, and then that contributes further to the differentiation and evolution of how the tree, so to speak, grows up.
Right. And even in identical twins in human beings, identical twins come from the exact same egg, fertilized egg, which splits into two. So identical twins, even though they come from the same combination of a sperm and an egg, they still are different right from the time they're born. You can still see differences in them. By the time they're born, you can see differences in them right away.
And what's interesting about that, even with the multiple personality kind of thing, where before the egg starts to cell divide and differentiate, the egg becomes two, and then each two of the two become 2, 4, 8, etc. So it's an interesting, the kind of two choices, or triplets the same way, where what's the sacred number of twin making or triplet making, where the egg, before it begins to develop, splits to develop differently in two relatively similar but still unique forms.
Right. Okay, so let's now get into the actual essay, now that Jung has told you that he was unsure of himself for his whole writing career, but finally decided to put it all down. So here's the essay in earnest. You're going to read that. First paragraph or so.
And I think I just would preamble this with, I think his lack of confidence or unsureness was he had to get past his scientific MD and get comfortable with the not knowing to go with that technical knowledge. So he had to kind of get past all the, okay, I've proven myself and I've learned all this, to go, oh, the unconscious, this is important too, with the invisible in a sense.
Right. So, okay, so read paragraphs 818 to through 820, please. And then I'll do 821, which is a big one.
It's Exposition is the title of this initial piece. Paragraph 818. The discoveries of modern physics have, as we know, brought about a significant change in our scientific picture of the world, in that they have shattered the absolute validity of natural law and made it relative. Natural laws are statistical truths, which means that they are completely valid only when we are dealing with macro physical quantities. In the realm of very small quantities, prediction becomes uncertain, if not impossible, because very small quantities no longer behave in accordance with the known natural laws. And the example of that is, if I take a spoon and dip it in the ocean and say there are no sharks in the spoon, so there are no sharks in the ocean, that's the bogus, impossible to predict kind of thing. So paragraph 819, the philosophical principle that underlies our conception of natural law is causality. But if the connection between cause and effect turns out to be only statistically valid and only relatively true, then the causal principle is only of relative use for explaining natural processes, and therefore presupposes the existence of one or more other factors which would be necessary for an explanation. This is as much as to say that the connection of events may in certain circumstances be other than causal and requires another principle of explanation. Paragraph 820. We shall naturally look round in vain in the macro physical world for acausal events, for the simple reason that we cannot imagine events that are connected non-causally and are capable of a non-causal explanation. But that does not mean that such events do not exist. Their existence, or at least their possibility, follows logically from the premise of statistical truth. So in that opening 3 paragraphs of the exposition, he's playing in the causal portion so that he can then proceed to play in what he's going to refer to as the acausal, or as I would synopsize as naturally present instead of statistically present. And I think that's important here. With this isn't so much about prediction, it's about him setting up causal considerations here so that he can turn to then present acausal without just jumping in the water too quickly.
Right. And Jung always kind of hated statistics in his career. And the example that he gives, which I think is a useful one to have in mind, is you take a large hole and you say you're going to fill it up. So you take, fairly sizable rocks, and you throw those fairly sizable rocks in and you fill up the hole. Now, is the hole full? Well, actually, no, because then you can take gravel and start pouring the gravel into it, and the gravel will find its way into the cracks, and it'll still take a lot of gravel in that case. And then you say, is it full? And the answer is no. And you take sand and you fill the hole in with sand, and it can still take a lot of sand in that hole before it seems like it's full. And you say, well, is it full now? And the answer is, well, no, it's not, because now you can pour water into that hole and find that it'll hold quite a lot of water as well. And so when you take a statistical proof and believe it, you've forgotten the black swan, okay, which is that which you haven't considered.
Well, and I think it's interesting. I've had several conversations in the last couple of weeks where people said, well, Jordan, I think we just need to agree to disagree. And I always say, well, no, thank you. We don't have to agree to disagree. We can simply disagree. Disagreement's just fine. We don't need to make that, nicety of stopping the alleged conflict. And it's always about quantum physics, because in quantum physics, we're at the point of the sand and saying, is it full? And we're going to explore the water. And of course, if you tap on one of the big rocks, you'll fill it all through the water. And I'm like, that's
Sure.
non-local mind. That's quantum physics. Quantum physics to me is just the newest, more poetic, scientific way to say the word nature. And it's, I know that now they're trying to work with quantum computing. And if you had, 16 quantum entanglements, et cetera, and cool, but that's another way to capitalize and utilize nature. So I find that it's interesting that the ooh la la angels singing when people say quantum this or quantum that, and it's not so new, it's just nature. And okay, we're exploring more and more because we're
getting deeper, but we haven't got the answer yet. We can't get our minds around it. stupid as we are.
Yeah.
And yeah, so
that's funny, as stupid as we are. One of my jokes is that when you do something that feels great, you have an experience that's just amazing, and you get that cascade of tingles. I call them ablution tingles. Or when you see a sculpture at just that right frame where, oh, that's beauty for me. That's the brain saying, you're too dumb to run this thing. I'm going to give you this big dopamine rush. So you go, oh, do that again. It's like,
right on. Okay, moving on. Paragraph 821. So I'll take the hit on this since you took the hit earlier in the class. Okay, paragraph 821. The experimental method of inquiry aims at establishing regular events which can be repeated. Consequently, unique or rare events are ruled out of account. Moreover, the experiment imposes limiting conditions on nature, for its aim is to force her to give answers to questions devised by man. Every answer of nature is therefore more or less influenced by the kind of questions asked, and the result is always a hybrid product. The so-called scientific view of the world based on this can hardly be anything more than a psychologically biased partial view, which misses out all those by no means unimportant aspects that cannot be grasped statistically. But to grasp these unique or rare events at all, we seem to be dependent on equally unique and individual descriptions. This would result in a chaotic collection of curiosities, rather like those old natural history cabinets where one finds cheek by jowl with fossils and anatomical monsters in bottles, the horn of a unicorn, the mandragora mannequin, and a dried mermaid. The descriptive sciences, and above all biology in the widest sense, are familiar with these unique specimens, and in their case, only one example of an organism, no matter how unbelievable it may be, is needed to establish its existence. At any rate, numerous observers will be able to convince themselves on the evidence of their own eyes that such a creature does in fact exist. But where we are dealing with ephemeral events which leave no demonstrable traces behind them, except fragmentary memories in people's minds, then a single witness no longer suffices, nor would several witnesses be enough to make a unique event appear absolutely credible. One has only to think of the notorious unreliability of eyewitness accounts. In these circumstances, we are faced with the necessity of finding out whether the apparently unique event is really unique in our recorded experience, or whether the same or similar events are not to be found elsewhere. Here, the consensus omnium, the general consensus, plays a very important role psychologically, though empirically it is somewhat doubtful, for only in exceptional cases does the consensus omnium prove to be of value in establishing facts. The empiricist will not leave it out of account, but will do better not to rely on it. Absolutely unique and ephemeral events whose existence we have no means of either denying or proving can never be the object of empirical science. Rare events might very well be, provided that there was a sufficient number of reliable individual observations. The so-called possibility of such events is of no importance whatever, for the criterion of what is possible in any age is derived from that age's rationalistic assumptions. There are no absolute natural laws to whose authority one can appeal in support of one's prejudices. The most that can fairly be demanded is that the number of individual observations shall be as high as possible. If this number, statistically considered, falls within the limits of chance expectations, then it has been statistically proved that it was a question of chance, but no explanation has thereby been furnished. There has merely been an exception to the rule. When, for instance, the number of symptoms indicating a complex falls below the probable number of disturbances to be expected during the association experiment, this is no justification for assuming that no complex exists. But that did not prevent the reaction disturbances from being regarded earlier as pure chance. Okay.
And I would reiterate I put a spoon in the ocean and see no sharks in the spoon, so I say there are no sharks in the ocean, which is total fallacy. And
Right.
That way it's not making the point across of what he's doing here. Also with this consensus omnium, plays a very important role psychologically. People, though empirically it is somewhat doubtful, only in exceptional cases does the consensus omnium, or general consensus, prove to be of value in establishing facts. And I had written in the margin, in essence, no, in quotes, alternative facts. That the label of alternative facts we have these days from the general consensus, that's an attempt to label opinion as a fact. And
Right.
that, facts and truth and love all need no adjectives. So it's the kind of thing where alternative facts, then just because it has an adjective means it's not a fact.
Right. And we see this in current events. We see it in the January 6th event, where many of the people who rioted and who went into the Capitol on that day, they have a different perspective, and they're trying to push that forward. For example, the leader of the Proud Boys now wants to push together this supposed fact that he had permission to do this by the President of the United States.
Right.
But consensus omnium has to be against these people, because we have millions of people that saw it in the event, actually live, and many of the rest of us who weren't watching during the actual invasion of the Capitol. We were doing an advanced reading group that day, so we did not stop to hear what was going on live, but we, because of the validity of video recordings, we can now see through photographs and video recordings what actually happened. And so we can make our own judgments about it, even though we weren't physically watching. Jordan.
Yeah, and I think that's important. Like he says, that we see with our own eyes the video, the audio, the photos. And then in these days, though, even that gets called into question. When I'm watching, I'm often looking for shadow direction and color, hue, saturation, and intensity in the background versus on the skin tone of the person they're utilizing, to see if they've just green screened, photoshopped out in a videography manner the person into a place that person's never even been to.
Right.
So you have to be careful.
So what's going on now in current events is people are saying, "Oh, that was just a peaceful crowd." That's like in the first Star Wars movie, where Obi-Wan Kenobi says, "These aren't the droids you're looking for. Move on." Right. These aren't the droids you're looking for. Move on. And the AI guards just move on. They follow that.
And they may even
redirection.
They may have even repeated him, where they said, "Oh, these aren't the droids we were looking for," before they moved on.
Yes, so that's exactly what they said. That's right.
Forced, yeah.
Yeah, so they reconfirm it themselves, but then
he planted the suggestion,
Yeah, but a few million people saw the movie, and we all know that they were the droid looking for, but they blew it.
Right. Well, and if you look at, they're stormtroopers. So, I mean, if you look at all the cartoons that ever involve stormtroopers, they're always about, they never hit their target. It's like they always miss.
Yeah. Right.
So
So
all you have to do is stand there. If you watch that, you just stand there. They're not going to hit you. It's like no reason to run. They can't hit you.
yeah. So anyway, this has been taken up in fiction all over the world for hundreds of years. There's the famous Japanese story Rashomon, which is about how different people saw the same event, and this was remade into a movie. I don't remember the name of the movie, but the movie was about the President of the United States coming to give a speech in Spain, I think, and he's on the dais, and all of a sudden there's this explosion, and they go around and they try to get everybody's perspective on what happened, and everybody has a different idea of what happened.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't remember how it comes out. I guess the good guys win as usual, but in any case, those are stories and videos. There is a Japanese film called Rashomon, which redepicts the ancient 400 or 500 year old story Rashomon, but it's about this phenomenon of many different observers will see things differently.
Yeah, and so I think the example too of the three colleagues who listened to Jung lecturing, speaking, and then come out, and he was talking just to me, and he said, and all three of them had a completely different perspective. Right. The only thing similar was they all felt he was talking only to them. So exactly. It was very much received, as it were.
Right. And this is an observation now that we've made in Confluence where, and I'll just hold this up. Let me just hide my virtual background for a moment. Okay, so in Confluence, we have found this sentence, which sums up everything. Okay, the purpose of Jung psychology, whole psychology, is to make accessible. I'm sorry, I'm reading it backwards, so I'm having more problems than usual.
Actually, the purpose. If hold it up closer.
Just a minute. I got it now. Okay. The purpose of Jung's whole psychology is to make accessible to us that healing power which resides in our unconscious. Okay, now that sentence is probably the most important sentence that I have read in all my reading of Jungian psychology, because it's the unconscious that can solve our problems. It really does. And so, and the same thing works if you exchange the words Jung's whole psychology for all religions or all creative acts of whatever kind. All of them bring us closer to the healing power of our own unconscious. And that's their attraction. And go ahead.
I was going to say, I feel as a subset directly to that, what I've come to feel currently, my perspective about imagination, about divination, about art, about just the visual language, and just stay with the image, stay with the image, stay with the image. Once an image strikes a chord to resonate in the unconscious, that then rings the doorbell on the portal of the unconscious to open up, and then the creative drive wells up these nourishing contents for the psyche. So I think it goes full circle between imagination and personal unconscious to the doorbell of the portal of the unconscious, and then the verb, the creative drive, wells up, create these neural contents for the psyche.
Right. In the last 2 weeks, I've been teaching young people how to do the doodle, which Colleen Kibera has taught us to do. And what the doodle does is it gives you access to your unconscious quite directly. And I have delivered the same class, exactly the same class, in pre-K to 12th grade. And it's incredible how the results are almost identical between pre-K and 12th grade. And what it does, you can see immediately what the state of mind of the people you're talking with is. Okay, so it's a kind of Rorschach test for the art teacher to see exactly where people are and what they need in order to grok it in art. And to the extent that we are able, through a 1-hour class, or in some cases I had 25 minutes to give the class, to help them understand that it's their unconscious talking to them, which is telling them what to put on the paper. And they can actually hear that. To the extent that we can connect them with their unconscious, it is just an invaluable tool. And what I've been teaching them now, more in the high school level, but I said, folks, this is a life hack. You know, anytime you're in trouble, no matter what kind of trouble, no matter whether you're in jail or you're pregnant or your mother's died or whatever it is, if you start to doodle, then your unconscious, you can call it God if you want to, but your deep self is going to tell you what the answer is for you and how to deal with it in your own life, whatever it is. It's just a tremendous life hack. And so, if ever you're feeling down and you need to do something to improve your attitude, if you simply start to doodle, the answer will come to you. I don't know what the answer is. It will come from you, but I know that it will come if you pay attention to it. Comments, Jordan?
Well, I think also gazing into an image or a candle is a life hack. It's somehow you either are perceiving and experiencing the visual voice, which often needs no words, or you're enacting the visual voice with doodling from within that also needs no words. And I think I love that you put it as a life hack, because one of the homework pieces I give clients is 1 minute a day, just gaze at that image and stay with it for 15 to 30 seconds. You'll feel where the words go away, and you'll know it's all image. And just that last 30 seconds, I mean, just 1 minute a day, and that 30 seconds of just gaze into the image with nothing, you will get it.
I'm sorry, Jordan. I accidentally ripped out my headset, so I did not hear anything you said in the last 30 seconds. So could you start that again for my benefit?
Oh, certainly. I mean, because to me, I like that you put it as doodling as a life hack.
Yeah.
Because homework I give to my clients is to stay with the image and the picture of their session on the table, and just to open it up whenever they think about it, and whatever catches their eye, zoom in on that and just gaze 15 to 30 seconds. That's it. Wait till you'll feel the words go away. And then you're just steeping in the pool of the image, and actually then just 30 more seconds of only image, no intent to have a product or a result, or have it do anything. And it's training the imaginal and training the unconscious to participate. And that, I find, is where the heart of the matter usually lives. And
Absolutely.
It doesn't need words. And then you can take what you experience there and wrap that idea, that abstract, intangible idea, wrap that as the heart of the matter of your actions.
Yeah.
And I think they go hand in hand. But when you called it a life hack, I really like that, because then gazing into a candle, life hack. Gazing
or the other thing you can do is lie on your back and just watch clouds go by until you see something there. Okay. And, when I'm demonstrating this to the young people, I just scribble a doodle out there, and eventually, and it doesn't take long, like a minute or so of just basically scribbling a doodle out there, I'll start to see things in the image, in the lines.
And that reminds me of Georgia O'Keeffe, who someone said, well, Miss O'Keeffe, why do you paint your flowers so big? And she said, everybody looks. I would like everyone to see.
Yeah.
So that's making connections, which is the Acausal connecting principle, making connections.
Right. Okay. So would you read 822, please?
Yep. Paragraph 822. Although in biology especially, we move in a sphere where causal explanations often seem very unsatisfactory, indeed well nigh impossible. We shall not concern ourselves here with the problems of biology, but rather with the question whether there may not be some general field where acausal events not only are possible, but are found to be actual facts.
Okay, and the point of all of Jung's psychology, among other things, is the imaginal is filled with actual facts.
Right.
And his frustration was that he couldn't get people to recognize that there are actual facts that you can't see, smell, taste, hear, or touch. And so that's been part of my lesson the last couple of weeks at all these levels, which is how many people in the room think you're conscious. And some of the little kids say, what's conscious? What does that mean? Fair enough. But very few of them, even at the high school level, are confident enough to say that they're conscious. And yet the assumption that things have to be physical facts, if you say it to them and explain it to them, they'll say, oh yeah, I'm conscious like that. And I at the beginning, I say, well, today we're going to talk about the elephant in the room. And then I go into this routine about how many think you're conscious, etc. And I get in about 15 or 30 minutes and then say, okay, I'm thinking of an animal. What animal am I thinking of? And I've only had in 2 weeks of classes, with the classes changing every hour, I've only had 2 students who guessed elephant. Okay. And then I say, well, okay, now that you know it's an elephant, now it's in everybody's mind. And that was, everybody knows what an elephant looks like, right? And so everybody, the pre-K on up. And so that's a fact that you couldn't find through any of your senses. It's been fun. It's interesting.
Well, that's a great example to me too of one of my big beefs with philosophy. I mean, every philosopher is infinite in their own compartment.
Yep.
As it were. But the fact that there are the imaginal is filled with facts. Yeah. I always jump over to the quote, know thyself above the door, know thyself and you will know the universe. Mm-hmm. And philosophers always, they nod their head and then they move on. And wait, what's are you going through the process of not reading another book, but of reading your inner workings? And they're, no, that's what happens is they want finished and polished, pretty and gimmicky. And even if it's Schopenhauer, it can be sometimes gimmicky, because when you get people pigeonholed in their own pigeonhole, and I find that know thyself and you'll know the universe, that inner wisdom is all in there. The imaginal facts can tell you everything you need. And so I think when you activate that, then the things you see, appearance versus reality, you can have a more robust clarity as to not having expectations and blind spots, but actually navigating like in a car, and you're not running into stuff all the time.
Yeah.
But in your life, and driving your life with a know thyself and you'll know the universe, not just saying those words and going, and moving on. It's okay, then go ahead and add the verb of the process of actually go do that.
Yeah. So meanwhile, I want to urge everyone to think about this. People don't necessarily know what to do, and they for work, and they don't want to necessarily flip burgers at Burger King. And if you, in my county, which is a pretty upscale county in the country, it's it has the 46th largest school district in the country in my county. They're desperate for substitute teachers. And you don't even have to have a college degree, believe it or not. As long as you can demonstrate that you have 48 credit hours in a college anywhere, 48 credit hours, you can be a substitute teacher in this county. And I think if you don't have a degree, they pay you $105 a day. But if you do have a degree, they give you $120 a day. And if you do long-term substituting for one class, like a class you take over because of a pregnancy or something like that, they'll pay you $150 a day. So, I've been teaching the doodle as kind of an experiment to see what kids know and how kids at all levels will react to it, because I've seen it done with 70-year-olds, right? And I know how I react to it. I know that I hear my unconscious coming through when I do the doodle, and so it's very informative to me to do that. And so Colleen Kibert and I have developed this single lesson. I've been giving exactly the same lesson in every art class, regardless of level, and it works perfectly. And it just is a wonderful thing to do with classes. So if you here they're desperate for substitutes. So if you hear a call, you can probably substitute teach in your location. And here they have a wonderful system where they show you all the jobs that require substitutes for the coming month. And so I was able to go through and select all the art classes. It was really good. And so,
do you notice that the younger they are, the quicker they are on the uptake, and that they're more connected and have to like draw back fewer curtains of
right.
Be conditioning?
Yeah, they get on with it. They definitely do. And you definitely make some observations about boys and girls in these classes, how they're different. And I'm not going to spoil the surprise if you do it, but you definitely see a difference between boys and girls at all ages. So anyway, I want to comment on one thing Susan has said. When I was a teenager, I used the lying on the grass, staring at the clouds and finding images. So how did you use it? And What was it doing for you, Susan? That's the question. And that's a question. Okay. All right. Let's go on to 823. I'll read. Let's see. Okay. I'll read 823. 823 and 24. Now there is, in our experience, an immeasurably wide field whose extent forms, as it were, the counterbalance to the domain of causality. This is the world of chance, where a chance event seems causally unconnected with the coinciding fact, so we shall have to examine the nature of the whole idea of chance a little more closely. Chance, we say, must obviously be susceptible to some causal explanation and is only called chance or coincidence because its causality has not yet been discovered. Since we have an inveterate conviction of the absolute validity of causal law, we regard this explanation of chance as being quite adequate. But if the causal principle is only relatively valid, when it follows that even though in the vast majority of cases, an apparently chance series can be causally explained, there must still remain a number of cases which do not show any causal connection. We are therefore faced with the task of sifting chance events and separating the acausal ones from those that can be causally explained. It stands to reason that the number of causally explicable events will far exceed those suspected of acausality, for which reason a superficial or unprejudiced observer may easily overlook the relatively rare acausal phenomena. As a result, or as soon as we come to deal with the problem of chance, the need for statistical evaluation of the events in question forces itself upon us. Jordan.
And I would just change the for which reason a superficial or prejudiced observer rather than unprejudiced.
Okay,
because the prejudiced observer is going to have the expectation of seeing what they want to see, hearing what they want to hear, whereas the unprejudiced person is going to see what's there because the curiosity and wonderment doesn't care about all the previous facts. It's their whole life up to that point where it may inform how they perceive, but it doesn't distort how they perceive as much.
Right. And I would say that, something, if you get a statistician going, you say, let's flip a coin and we'll flip it 100 times and see statistically what happens and if there's a causal connection. But I can tell you that by flipping a coin, you can always get the correct answer, and you only have to flip the coin once. And the way that works is you have a question that you want to know the right answer, like, is this the right person for me? Well, if you have to ask that question, chances are they're not. But aside from
that, reminds me of my dad. He's like, you guys oftentimes be aware that if you have to ask, don't.
Right. Okay.
You need to experience a little more before you pose the question.
Right. But anyway, if you flip a coin and it comes up, regardless of which side it comes up on, if you're satisfied with that result, then you've got your answer. If you think, oh, I think I better flip next best 2 out of 3, then you also have your answer. You actually wanted the other side.
Right.
Yeah. Your psyche is telling you, I prefer the other side. If you get this, if you hear your psyche saying, oh, let's get best 2 out of 3, then you know immediately, you don't even have to flip again, that your psyche was looking for the other side, and that's what you wanted. And
yeah, it's like people pull a tarot card, and they're like, oh no, not that one. I'm going to pull another qualifier card, you call it. It's like, okay, why did you pull them in the first place? By the time you get to this question, you've already spent the process. You knew the answer. You just don't want to erp it up. It's like,
right on. Okay.
all right.
So go on, Jordan.
24.
Yeah.
It is not possible to sift the empirical material without a criterion of distinction. How are we to recognize acausal combinations of events, since it is obviously impossible to examine all chance happenings for their causality? To answer to this is that acausal events may be expected most readily where, on closer reflection, a causal connection appears to be inconceivable. As an example, I would cite the, in quotes, duplication of cases, which is a phenomenon well known to every doctor. Occasionally, there is a trebling, or even more, so that Conover can speak of a law of series, of which he gives a number of excellent examples. In the majority of such cases, there is not even the remotest probability of a causal connection between the coinciding events. When, for instance, I am faced with the fact that my tram ticket bears the same number as the theater ticket, which I buy immediately afterwards, and I receive that same evening a telephone call during which the same number is mentioned again as a telephone number, then a causal connection between these events seems to me improbable in the extreme, although it is obvious that each must have its own causality. I know, on the other hand, that chance happenings have a tendency to fall into aperiodic groupings, necessarily so, because otherwise there would be only a periodic or regular arrangement of events, which by definition would exclude chance.
Right.
And what's interesting there is that in terms of connections, in terms of relationships, I remember writing an essay in architectural college about the nature of relationship of forms and spaces. And this right here, the acausal, reminds me, when he has a series of 3, reminds me of the section where I wrote about the relationship by juxtaposition. Mm-hmm. It's like 2 people in a crowd, but there is actually no inherent relationship between them. They're not connecting, they're just adjacent or juxtaposed. Whereas relationship by connection or integration is different. So with a series of 3 here, he's like, oh, it's the same number, but there isn't a relationship. And so there's a relationship of juxtaposition, or the relationship of simply adjacency. For example, 2 people sitting next to each other in a crowd who don't know each other. One always looks left to their left, and the other always looks to their right. They never look toward each other, and they never will, further down the road, recognize that they have been sitting right next to that person. And so the thing is, I think when things don't interact, that's not a causal, that's lack of relationship. But there's an interaction, I think, that's a causal when things don't necessarily by some probability come together.
Right. What I have often seen is that, if you open yourself, like in a group of people, I used to do this with Indian doctors and their spouses, because I would go to their annual convention, and I'd be sitting there, and my Indian colleague would say absolutely nothing, and I would go around the table and I would find something in common with every single one of them, and without any difficulty whatsoever. And so the point is that it's not even a matter of chance. There are synchronicities everywhere you look. And I know that if I sit at a table or I go into a group and I start talking with people, instantly I will have a rapport with everybody in the group without any difficulty whatsoever, because there will always be a synchronicity.
There will. And I think one of the things is because we're all on the same planet. I mean, it's like there's going to be some kind of cohabitation of a similar experience, as it were.
Right. Okay. And Richard says, I believe clouds have intelligence, and it's the way God keeps tabs on the world. I'm probably way off today's subject as I just tuned in. Well, you're not so far off, Richard. And actually, the point is well taken, because
and there's so much eyes in the sky of the big watcher, but at the same time, that's a valid question to look at being and nothingness. I mean, as to, well, what's a cloud? I mean, go back to your elephant. A big cloud weighs as much as an elephant. I mean, it's that much water vaporized, expanded in the air. Tons.
Sure. Right. As the Floridians learned to their detriment this week. So Susan says, I had hoped that the meaning of life would appear in the clouds. I was a very depressed teen. The benefit was that it was calming and made me want to create things. Well, the meaning of your life does relate to being an artist, I believe. So, that's exactly what happened. The meaning of life did appear in the clouds very, very concretely.
Her cloud example is actually kind of wonderful for mental health and well-being, I find, because when you do something, gaze deeply into something without trying to solve it, without any need for words, you literally quiet the chatter. And you get past your inner chatter that's reacting, not responding to the outer world. And then pretty quickly you're steeping in a pool of clouds, and it's calming. Sometimes it's intensifying. Sometimes it just, you hop up and I got to go paint. I mean, it invigorates. It's a form giver. But I love that example that Susan just gave of it was in a sense healing, but not healing a brokenness, healing by getting through, opening the veils to get back to what's really you, rather than the, confused chatter of the world that's kind of just within the precipice behind the eyes.
Yeah. So Susan says, yes, righto. So we nailed it here.
Thanks for your example, Susan. Because I think
that's a good example, though, because the point is that if you do something like that, like stare into a flame or look at the clouds or what have you, even at looking at random stuff on your screen saver, something emerges from it. I'm not saying what, I mean, that you have to discern for yourself, but it does emerge. It opens your unconscious, so your unconscious can answer the questions you have in life.
Completely. And I look at the gazing aspect as kind of meditation 101. Some people can't meditate, and some people go, I don't, you should meditate every 20 minutes a day. Well, I don't have time. Oh, then you should meditate for an hour a day. It's like, but what happens, I find, for deep meditation without any subject matter and just to meditate, you need to be physically fit.
Right.
To really stay in there, because your body has to kind of get locked into an unflexed stillness, which is a certain muscular kind of double talk, as it would be. But just gazing into something will, in a sense, confuse the consciousness enough to let you drop in and, distract you with something that, I imagine that the clouds probably disappear after a while, maybe even, or better, that she stays focused on the clouds. Either way. But I find that the gazing aspect is a wonderful way to introduce people to, this is not a problem to be solved. This is a life to be experienced, and putting that piece with the problems that we solve, because I think they go hand in hand to make things more robust and effective.
Right. And I see this beautiful scene that Shauna has put on the screen here, which I think everybody on YouTube can also see, offers two beautiful examples of how this could work as well, at least two. One is that in the variegation of her knotty pine paneling, you can find meaning. Your psyche will tell you some meaning if you just look at the differences in the variations in the knotty pine. And the other is in the forest outside her home, where she's seeing this beautiful forest, and it's very variegated, and you can find meaning in that. I mean, right here I see a pair of eyes and a nose here and a mouth. I can see an actual face right in the trees here, which I don't know if Shauna would see it, but I certainly do. Do you see the face there?
I do. And at the same time, I also see not traditional Victorian architecture. I see in that expressed structure the idea of Victorian architecture, or an English country garden, is you have a very specific form, and then anything goes within the form. So all the nature in the windows, all the knotty pine in between the bays of the joists, and that's just a Victorian concept. And to me, it's a metaphor for the psyche, that we have this very specific identity and shape, and then all that other goes on within that. And so I see that too. Beyond
and of course, I often in a chaos like this of the trees, I often see many things. So right here, I see another face. Here's the eyes, and the nose is here with sort of a frowning mouth, and the chin right there. But then I see a hoot owl right here, and here's this hoot owl with the eyes of the hoot owl going up and the nose of it there.
I can't see her cursor, but because it's not a screen share, just her background. But
okay. Well, I'm looking at the fourth column from the left, the third column from the right, in the right panel of the middle set of windows. And so in the bottom 1/6 of the middle set of windows, I see this one face. And then going up one, I see a hoot owl right there, right in the. Do you see it?
I do. Yeah. And what I think is interesting about that is just like the elephant in the room.
Yeah.
Once seen, it cannot be unseen.
Exactly.
And so that to me is the power of expectation. Because then the best second step is to be able to forget the hoot owl. What else can I see? Yeah. And can I find Mary Cassatt's face, or Einstein's, that kind of thing, and playing the games is. It's always interesting to me to look into patterns. Sometimes I'll be brushing my teeth and I look down at the tile floor and I think, I could do a photo series. What animal or whatever did I see in the stone tile, in the pattern.
Well, okay. So Richard says, I think the meaning of all human life is we somehow seed the universe with basic patterns of life. God made us in his image so we could do so. And I would say that we made God in our image so that we could do so. But either way, it works, I think. And then Susan, go ahead.
I think that brings up a huge, that's a good statement to bring up and prompt a huge, I think, debate philosophically and psychologically. Is there's a kind of narcissistic view of the world when we personify nature. Always make it look like us, always make it act like us, instead of what's our inner nature and how do we act like that instead. Because I think if we can lose the me, which is childish, and get to the us of how I am nature, rather than it's not imitating me. It's I'm it. I'm not even imitating. Then
Yeah.
I think there's a good exercise there.
Right. And Susan says, it made me think of your selfie in the chapel. I see the darkness and the emergence of light and thought of wholeness. Right. And at the time, in that instant, which was the total evolution, was no more than 10 seconds. So I wasn't in any way thinking of wholeness, or, consciously, I was not thinking of wholeness or any other such thing. I was just saying, wow, look at that scene with the striated light coming down in the chapel. And then, I better take a picture of this. Nobody will believe it if I don't take a picture of it. And so that's the beauty of everybody having their own camera and video camera with us now in our smartphones. We can, people can catch these synchronicities and show them to others, and we can have more knowledge of synchronicity. But anyway, we need to wrap up, but go ahead.
We do just one quick other example to not pull an animal or a human in. If you look up above the lamp, it looks like a sunrise or sunset at dusk in orange, hazy atmosphere above a night scene landscape in the shadow of the light of the lamp. So there's like this sunset or fire in the distance over this dark night lit landscape.
Yeah, I mean, in Shauna's scene, I can see so many different things.
Yeah.
Well,
and that's what's really cool about it. If you have, say, Naughty Pine, but then you regulate it with this cadence of the purlins or the rafters, and then you actually just rafters, purlins go the other way. But the rafters are this regular, call it logic or reason. And then you have this acausal pattern in the Naughty Pine that's sliced from the nature of the tree that goes in between. It's a great metaphor to how to utilize chaos or nature, as it were. And that's why I never designed Victorian architecture, and I don't make English gardens, but it's one of my favorite things besides Art Nouveau, because Art Nouveau is the form happens just cause. And then Victorian, the form happens within a shape that's very formed. So you can play the back and forth between. Right.
So you see it in my reaction to Shauna's image here, where I'm already projecting onto the forest all these different faces, right?
I was looking just for look at the sunset of the night sky, or the
right. And so you can see so many things, like look to the right of the top of the chair there. There's a white up arrow right there. It goes up about. Yeah. You see it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's the thing, is once you see it, and what I think is funny is I made the point of, if we don't personify, except I made the point after you went nature. And so what happened is I'm going searching for something without human beings or animals. So then I'm actually personifying this logic that I'm trying to show some illogic by finding that sunset, and so, I can I kind of walked into my own snare, as it were, and, and I think that's kind of even more funny, because then there's no need for an answer, but seeing these things is such a wonderful exercise.
Right. Well, I bought this book used from Amazon. And so it used to be a library book, which apparently didn't get taken out very much. But
it's still have the card in the front.
Well, yeah, there's the card thing in front, which says the name of where it's from is not clear, but it's North 32nd Street, Phoenix. So it's Phoenix, Arizona. It came from Phoenix. And then I know the library number. Can you see that? It's
I see the white label. I don't see the
yeah.
Dewey Decimal.
Okay, there it is. Okay, there's the Dewey Decimal there. Okay, it's
Though.
yeah, it's BF23.J763V.8.
So
Anyway.
J for and B for volume 8.
Well, you can see I put this volume to good use. It may have sat on the library shelf in Phoenix for a number of years, but it has been put to good use here in my household. And
well, and also I wonder, I mean, books like that always intrigue me because they could also have the secret readings. I mean, I know I checked out too many books all the time. So sometimes I would just go sit down in the microbiology section and reach up behind me, sitting on the floor, and I would read cover to cover whatever I grabbed from the shelf and then put it back instead of checking it out. So maybe some people loved Jung, but if they brought it home, it wouldn't sit very well. So
right. And so Susan says, it is the library I took my boys to years ago. It is still there and has a wing of Paradise Valley Community College. Yeah.
nice.
So that's what it is. So there's a synchronicity for you.
Yeah. Thanks for the corroboration. I mean,
right. Oh yeah, it actually does say on the side Paradise Valley Community College.
Now, what's funny now that she has shown you how to see it, and now it can be unseen, and you found it. So it's like you knew what to look for, you couldn't find it.
Yep.
Well, so like they say, they're facts, damn facts, and statistics, but then she just gave an experience. Look at that, Paradise Valley.
There it is, and the address again. Oh my God. Okay, so we know all about that book.
Well, I wonder. I've started now.
That is a synchronicity, Susan. Yes, go ahead.
Really is. I've been buying like all my books new this last year, but as of last week, I haven't bought any this week, but I'm going to start buying them all used because it's, losing everything in the move, and see how long, if ever, it takes for me to get a book that has the crimped embossed Library of J. Jordan Hoggard seal. Someone gave me one of those Library of round, notary look stamps. See how long it takes me to get a Jung book that is mine, that was lost either in that move or some previous time.
Yep,
like
it might happen. It can happen.
Yeah,
that's the sort of thing that would happen. Okay.
At the Library of J. Jordan Hoggard, let me know. So I'll probably want to buy it.
Yeah. Okay, so thank you, everyone. We'll continue on with this. We have about 100 pages of synchronicity to talk about, and we've only just begun. So, Jordan, hold up the volume that you're looking at. That is the nice separate little book. That's I just bought this yesterday from Amazon for $10, so I recommend it. Synchronicity by C.G. Jung with the foreword by Sono Shamdasani. That's sort of the gold standard. I guess that came out in 2010.
What I like about this too is they have that preamble, the preface that's in addition to Jung's foreword, where we get a post-read book perspective. And I think it's more educational. People don't have to make the jump as much. And I think it makes it more accessible for more people, because Sono Shamdasani put, basically he gives it a place for you to plant it. I mean, there's better context, I think. So
and the irony is, and I'm going to tell a story out of school here because I'm going to tell a story about history. When I was a history major in college, the thing that they were talking about was create this timeline so that you know when this event happened, this event, and make it a very rigid timeline. But what they never discussed, none of my professors ever discussed, and history books typically do not discuss is who, what, why, when, where, and how. They get the who, what, they don't get the why. They get the when, and they usually miss the how also. So
Right.
they miss the why and the how. And so what that means is that every history book that's on the shelves needs to be rewritten to cover these things, especially the why, especially the psychological reasons why. Why the heck did all those kings and soldiers make their way to the Holy Land and wage war in the Holy Land? Why did the kingdom of I guess it's the kingdom of Jerusalem exist for 200 years before Saladin came in and got rid of the infidels? But why did that happen at all? And it's a big question. And we pretty much know why the state of Israel was created, and it was because the Jews who had suffered the Holocaust wanted a place where they could go where people wouldn't be beaten up on them all the time from whatever country in the world. And yet what they did was become a thorn in the side of the Arab world. And we should have given them a large tract of North America instead.
Well, yeah, that, and also things like two examples that come to mind for me are you take the war between the Romans and the Celts, or the Celts. Mm-hmm. And the Romans are the love of power, and the Celts are the power of love, with all the art, sculpture, and everything else, meaning the power of life. And in that sense, the wrong side won. So you get a lot of squash kibosh of the Celts. And then, even I think more prominent in my mind would be Eleanor of Aquitaine. And she's so demonized by so many historians because she schooled everybody. She was just talking about Pallas, Athena, Minerva, the ultimate strategist. Mm-hmm. I mean, they had to make up lies about her because they couldn't beat her. So to try to demonize her history rather than actually what she did. And I've been looking into some of, like, trying to peer behind what, here's what I'm supposed to see. This is what I know is probably there. But all the propaganda of, mudslinging, because she was such a badass. It's like, everyone couldn't beat her. So,
right. Anyway. Okay, well, thank you everybody for being here. We're 20 minutes over time, and so we'll have to, actually we're only 5 minutes over time because we started late, but it's been a good session, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Take care, and Jordan, maybe I'll see you tomorrow, I hope.
Tomorrow evening. Yep.
Take care now. What are we studying? Oh yeah, we're still studying the appendices to volume 7.
Yeah, two essays in analytical psychology and the appendices.
Yeah.
This volume didn't have an appendectomy, so we're going to go ahead and read through them. Yeah,
I think we have to move to something like the psychology of the collective unconscious or something. We'll see.
Yeah, anyway. We'll see. Because this book, Synchronicity is actually mentioned that. So
right.
Yeah, so maybe we utilize this as the form giver to step off and not get stuck on the rails, so to speak.
Right. So we'll be available at 8 p.m. Eastern time tomorrow night, and then on Wednesday at 4 p.m. Unfortunately, I missed last Wednesday because I was doing a high school and they work a little later. But 4 p.m. Eastern time on Wednesday for the advanced reading.